Hey, welcome to another edition of What's It Like? I'm Jay Liebenguth, your host. And for those of you keeping score at home, this is our 12th edition of the first season, so we call this the grand finale. But if you're watching out of order, there's plenty more to watch. We've saved the best for last. We've invited Jill Anderson, and one of the things that all of our guests have in common is they have a lot of dashes. It's performer, actress, and now documentarian. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us and blessing us on the first and final of this season.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, I want to give people a little bit of idea of who you are and where you've come from. So just give us the kind of the quick cook's tour of.
Sure. Well, my background is in theater and music, and I've made my career in those two disciplines all over the country. I've lived in Chicago, lived in New York City, traveled all over doing regional theater, concert work, cabaret work, and arts education.
And trod the boards in the Omaha area, too.
I have indeed. At pretty much every theater organization in Omaha.
My guess is that you look familiar to most people then.
To many people, to theater goers locally,
Yeah. So where has that taken you, and how has that become part of your life? Was it something you always set out to do?
In high school, I really identified that what brought me the greatest joy was doing theater and singing in the chorus and swing choir and all of that. And I knew then, this is my path for sure.
So you've lived the artist life then for a few years.
Yeah. I've lived it for many, many, many years, yes.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about today, and we can come back to some of those other things as it's appropriate, but you started another project. Did you have filmmaking in your blood in any way?
No, it was quite
you've been in films, so you've seen the process.
Right. What happened was I really fell into this by chance. It's a documentary film called 48 Stars that we are working on, and it involves interviews with people who lived through the Second World War era, so people generally in their 90s. But in 2014, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and I went to a natural health specialist for care. His name is Dr. Shawn Schmidt, and he's really quite a brilliant chiropractor, acupuncturist, Chinese medicine specialist.
Healer.
Yeah, he's a healer. And I went to him and we hit it off beautifully right off the bat. I had CDs of Irish music. That's one of the things that I do is sing traditional Celtic music. And I gave him some CDs just as a friendly gesture, and he loved them. And he said, I'm making a film and I want you to be my music director. Will you do that? And I said, sure, why not? So I committed to do that. And then shortly after that, we really, bonded over the ideas behind this film. And he said, what I really want you to be is a co-director alongside me. He comes from a very military background, a lot of military people in his family. He's very patriotic. And I come from a really different paradigm. And so I said to him, well, Shawn, I would love to co-direct this with you, but my angle on it is probably going to be really drastically different than yours. I'm interested in hearing alternative voices as well as, your aged white male veterans. I want to hear from war widows and Holocaust survivors and conscientious objectors from the Second World War era who you never hear from.
Right.
I want to stretch the envelope as wide as we can get it and really collect diverse stories. And he was like, yeah, I'm all about that. Let's do that. So we traveled all over the country. We've been to the South, to New York City, to San Francisco, to Hawaii, to the Midwest. And we've gathered stories from 48 individuals who had some connection to World War II. And we're not just asking, what did you do during the war? We're asking, what was your childhood like? What was growing up during the Depression like? What did you do after the war?
As part of that defines who you are as an individual, whether you're in war or whether you're not in war. It defines who we are and how we look at it.
Exactly. And people, whether they were in combat or not, many people women were working in factories, munitions factories, right here in Omaha. We talk to people of all different races and backgrounds. So it's just, wow, the stories are mind-blowing. And for many of them, the crux of their story or the meat of their individual story didn't happen during the war. For one fellow, Dabney Montgomery, living in Harlem, in New York City, he was a Tuskegee Airman. But he wasn't the guy up in the air. He was the delivery guy. He delivered supplies. So his story, actually fired up right after the war when, having served his country, he returned to Jim Crow laws and terrible racism in his home country. And that spurred him to enact to do an act of civil disobedience.
Right.
In Selma in the 1950s, long, before the march, Martin Luther King, he went into the police station and drank from the whites-only drinking fountain. And his recounting of that story is absolutely astonishing.
Yeah, we saw a little bit of the clip, and I will share that a little bit later in the show. But you talked about the differences in style, maybe even the differences in politics between you and your co-director.
Yeah,
how did that play out, and how did that?
It's fascinating, to tell you the truth. We're about on as far different ends of the spectrum as you can possibly get politically. He has steeped himself in sort of the honor and glory, greatest generation angle on World War II. And I, on the other hand, am coming at this as a theater professional and a storyteller, someone who is interested in getting into the micro story, the human angle on it, not necessarily an overarching, not painting with the broad brush, but getting down to specifics. What was your story as a Holocaust survivor or as a war widow? We talked to 3 gentlemen, Mennonites, who were conscientious objectors. They were, part of a peace church, a peace religion that forbids strapping on a gun. And their angle was fascinating. So, when we hear these stories, Shawn and I receive it in very different ways. And so, one of the people we talked to was a founding member of Veterans for Peace. And his angle was very eye-opening to Shawn, who had never heard, kind of a far left angle on it. And I've heard stories, it never ends up the way you expect it. There was one gentleman who was a prisoner of war, who was invited over by the Japanese with a group of American POWs for sort of a reconciliation ceremony. And I leaned in and I asked him, what was that like to have the Japanese who had been your captors take you, fly you over to Japan for this ceremony? It must have been so moving. And he said, I thought it was weak. They just apologized too much. And I was like, what? So his hero is John Wayne, this steely kind of male persona. So it's just fascinating, As soon as you think you've got somebody figured out in an interview, they throw you a curveball. And that's the stuff that I think makes for fascinating storytelling.
I have so many questions about those individual stories, but I wouldn't know where to start. So I really want to know a little bit more about the two of you working together, because it seems to me that if you start at opposite ends of the spectrum,
maybe you'll end up somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And that's a good place to be.
That's the question I have is, do you see that movement already? And to let everybody know, the movie is still a work in progress. You're still in the editing and combing through all of those wonderful hours of footage. So it's still a bit of time to go before we all get to enjoy that. But is that starting to fashion the story now?
Well, it is. I mean, one thing, if you're going to be a responsible documentarian, you're not going to try to shove your agenda down into a movie. My mission with this is to let the interviewees speak their truth. My approach is very much StoryCorps. It's like a StoryCorps approach to World War II. So we're not always looking for like the big heroic story of some battle. In one interview, a Women's Army Corps woman stationed in Italy snuck away from their drudgery work and found an underground grotto, a swimming grotto under some ancient building in Italy. Little American girls, beautiful American girls in their uniforms, in Italy, in Europe for the first time in their life. And there was this underground swimming grotto, little watery pool, and they stripped off their uniforms and leaped into the water. And in the middle of their joyous swim, a group of American GIs also found the grotto, and they had to hide in a nook and spy on those boys as they skinny dipped in the, but something as whimsical as that is as valid a World War II era story
Absolutely.
as the guy that stormed Normandy and survived.
What do you think the goal of this documentary is? Is it to change our opinions on what went on during World War II, or is it to give us a different perspective of war in general?
More that, and not even making any grand sweeping statements about war, what it means or what it is. I let the veterans tell me what it is.
48 stories.
I don't presume to overlay some narrative on top of what the only story, as far as I'm concerned, that is valid in a especially combat World War II story is from the person who has experienced it. There's a lot of propaganda that goes into the making of a war. I'm not interested in the propaganda.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the individual human stories, and that's what we're focusing in on again and again with these. So it's a pastiche, it's a quilt, it's a patchwork. And though a few things link it together, one of them being that it's of the generation that lived through that war. Okay, here's something that's interesting. I'm going to jump to a new track.
Okay.
The whole question of like our differing politics. Well, what led Shawn to feel a mission in his soul to make this movie was that his father was a Seabee in the South Pacific during the Second World War. And he desperately wanted to capture his father's war stories on video. He hired a woman and paid her a down payment, and she dragged her feet. And by the time she called him and said, "I'm ready now," he had to say, "I'm sorry, you're too late. My father's died." He passed away. And so Shawn missed out on capturing those stories for posterity. It broke his heart. And he went for years just feeling sad and bitter that opportunity had passed. And he was in an antique store and saw an old 48-star flag, the flag that would have flown over America during the Second World War, hanging on the wall as a backdrop for a bunch of rusty tools and flotsam and jetsam hanging off of it, old pots and pans. And he heard of his father's voice over his shoulder saying, "Get that crap off of there." Because in his day, you would never have treated the American flag as merely a backdrop for a bunch of rusty tools. And he marched up to the cashier and said, "That flag, I'm taking that with me. I'm taking that home." And he scrambled back there, pulled all the stuff off of it, packed that flag up, purchased it, and brought it home. So that 48-star flag then, as it lived in his home as a display flag, it sort of planted a seed in his mind that he needed to travel around and capture stories of this vanishing generation before they're all gone and can't speak to us anymore about what life was like back when they were growing up, when they were young people. That was his mission. And it was a mission of the heart. So I think that in a lot of ways, like, I'm the strategizer of the project. I'm working in the editing suite. I'm coming up with concepts of, what interviews do we still need to get? We need a nurse. How do we find a nurse? Making calls, setting things up. and strategizing what kind of questions are asked in these interviews. So I feel like if it's a body, I'm kind of the brain of the body, the strategizer, the cerebral part.
Okay.
And Shawn is the heart, because it was his love for his father.
That's what he brought.
That was the impetus for doing this project.
Well, I want to take a quick minute and show everybody just a little piece of the trailer.
And that is the only way the human story can be told.
This cut my heart out. And when you see it waving, you know you're home. No matter where it's at, if you see it waving, you know you're home.
Come, sweet death, come lay thy hands upon my flesh, and gently take my soul therein to the hiding place in heavenly rest. But pray, one wish I ask of thee, that I may take my blood and sow on yonder's clouds like seeds, and it return with drops of rain, giving to every man liberty. Come, sweet death, come.
Put the graphic on, but it's 48stars.org, so they can see the full 7-minute trailer. And part of that reason for that trailer is you're still trying to raise money. You're still in the midst of making this film.
We are. It's just a Goliath of a film.
It's a huge undertaking. If you're talking about an hour or two, or maybe sometimes 3 with each of these 48 people.
Well, yes, the interviews range anywhere from probably an hour and a half to 3 hours, depending on how complex the story was that we were unpacking there, So we have hundreds of hours of footage that we're just going to have to comb through meticulously and find like the meatiest and most impactful stories to choose.
You get a lot of hard decisions ahead of you.
We do, and not everything is going to, certainly we can't, some of the interviews maybe won't be as pertinent. There will be a lot that ends up on the cutting room floor, for sure.
Have you worked with anybody else? Have you worked with the World War II Museum? Have you worked with the U.S. government in any way to try and locate people?
Not so much. Mostly just networking and searching online. We've really just combed through a lot of information online to track people down.
You've made a big investment of yourself, it sounds as if.
Absolutely.
I'm quite sure you're not being paid as you're putting this together. Why that investment?
Well, there is a little bit of pay, but obviously it's a labor of love. And, the payoff is in this carrying forth a mission that I think is really worthwhile. The perspectives of these people that have lived 97 years, that's probably the median age of our interviewees. It's remarkable. I think there was something like over 3,000 years of human life in our interview, among
that's
all
amazing.
of these people. But capturing their perspective, the perspective of people who have lived since 1920 something, wow.
Yeah.
One woman was 99 years old and said she remembered doing the Charleston. This blows my mind, I think that it's absolutely a mission at this point. It has to be done. We have moments that no screenwriter in Hollywood, no actor could capture some of the moments that we have on film. They're just an epiphany, or they're devastating, or they just throw wide the door on the human condition in a way that is, astonishing.
Part of what I think is interesting is the idea that most of these folks that were actually in the war probably thought more than once of dying. And now here they are at a very ripe old age.
Oh, yeah.
And so they must feel some part of this as being their mission too, to tell these stories.
You know, it's fascinating. Many of them, I think, have never told these stories to anyone. And some of them, at age 95 or 97, have locked their feelings behind a door for all of their life because they had to cope. And here they are at 97. What do they have to lose to become vulnerable? So, I mean, it's a lot of old men crying and women and, you know, but it's a transparency that you would not have gotten necessarily if you had interviewed these people at age 50, 70.
Right.
At 96, it's like, wow, they're just, so many of them are a wide open book. They're able to release things that they've held forever. Some of them, their families want to watch the interview. And at the end, the families are mad at us. They're like, what? He never told us that story, you know?
So you've given them access to the interview. They've been able to, or they were just
Some
there
of them were in the room.
In the room
during the interview.
Yeah. What did it look like? Give us some of the dynamics behind it. You've been out filming this how long? And
yeah, oh gosh, it's like 3 years now.
okay.
But like, how do we go about doing it?
Yeah.
We arrive in the vehicle, the rental vehicle, with our cameras. We have 3 cameras and tripods and sound equipment, and we sort of like bum rush the poor senior in their, you know,
What did I sign in
nursing
for?
home or their home or wherever, and immediately figure out where's the best light in the room. We rearrange their furniture, sit them down, put a lapel mic on them, and then just start into asking them questions about, you know, where were you born? In what year? What are your earliest memories from your childhood? And we just take them up through the war, and we, you know, it's very loose. We ask some leading questions, but then we really let them take it from there. And some people are very stiff and nervous in front of the camera, whereas others kind of don't even remember that it's there. They get into their story and their emotional recollection of something, and all the wires go away.
What's it going to take to finish this movie?
It's going to take a lot of money. It's going to take more time in the editing, just tons of hours in the editing suite, combing through things and finding the heart of each story, and then deciding which stories are the ones that are like the big stories. And then what moments and little snippets can set the scene or set the period, you know, the time period. And you know, it's gonna take a really keen eye for how to massage this into something cohesive. Because at this point, it's, you know, like I said, it's a scrap, you know, piecemeal kind of quilt.
Is it upsetting that some of the folks that were part of this won't probably see the final?
Most of them probably won't.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sad. We lose interviewees. In the last 3 years, we've lost many people. But the beautiful part of it is that, like I said, the miracle of trust has happened over and over. Complete and total transparency and trust, where they speak about the most sad moment of their life, or something that was joyous for them, that was transcendental for them, or they speak about something that touched their spirit. So, you know, Ken Burns is very meticulous in the way that he assembles they're brilliant, you know.
Right.
Goodness gracious, Ken Burns. And this, you know, not one of us is a filmmaker in this.
Right.
I am a storyteller and an actor and a singer. Shawn is a natural health specialist. Our cameraman is an IT guy, you know. So it's really just a bunch of novices kind of like fishing around and then finding these gems that are my God, the journey has been unbelievable for every one of us.
Well, our crack staff has done some research and found out it's your birthday today. So if we had a candle, if we were able to put that and to blow out and you could make that wish, since you're not actually doing that, what would that wish be for this particular film?
My wish, it sounds mercenary, but my wish is that the funds, we raise the funds and we are able to carry forth with doing the work that needs to be done to make this the gorgeous thing it's destined to be.
Tell people where they can find about it online so they can help out.
You can go to 48stars.org, and that's 48 STARS, lowercase, all one word, .org. And there's the trailer, the full trailer is at that. And then also a lot of written descriptions of why we got into this project, what our different angles are on it, and quotes from some of the big quotes from our interviewees. Got this little flyer here, and that's got some of the amazing. May I read a few quotes?
Sure.
Do we have time for that? This is from Midge Heath from Omaha, Nebraska, a war widow. I remember vividly going to the train to see him off. All those wives in tears, all those mothers in tears, seemed like half of Omaha got on that train to go to war. Here's one from Marcella LeBeau, a native Lakota Sioux native woman who was a nurse in the Battle of the Bulge. She says in a poem, "O great spirit, now hold my hand and walk with me up the cliff of Omaha Beach, filled with emotion no words can ever express." From a paratrooper, he says, "I'm proud of that flag. I'm a firm believer in old glory, and that's that." So many different angles.
Many different stories.
Many different stories.
Yeah. We can't wait to see it, Jill. Thank you so much.
I can't wait for you to see it.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us on the final edition of this season. Best
Thank
of
you for
luck
the
to you.
cupcake.
Our pleasure. And please, please, please come back and talk to us when it's time to see this wonderful work.
I absolutely will.
Thank you.
Thank you.